perimeter with 1:15 left on this 5-minute major. Puck put in front, Quap the save, rebound loose, backhand,
oh my goodness,
scores, and he shot that one between his legs, did Michkov.
Hat trick. Watch this here, folks. This is unbelievable. Matvei Michkov with the incredibly quick hands. Nice puck work around by the Russians. As number 17, keep your eyes on him here. The puck pops out. It's rolling on him as it comes out here, and he is going to just put it right between his legs.
Hey everybody, it's Isaiah. Just reminding you that FlyersNittyGritty.com and the O&B Puckcast are brought to you by Summit Public Adjusters. Hey, do you have damage to your home? Not sure who to call? We suggest that you call Summit Public Adjusters before your insurance company. Dealing with your insurance company can be very stressful. Let Summit take the stress out of the claims process. From storm damage to your roof, to toilet overflows, to broken pipes and fires, Summit gets you the most money for your repairs. So next time Mother Nature leaves you in need of repairs, call Summit Public Adjusters at 215-752-0560 or visit summitpublicadjusters.com. Licensed in PA and New Jersey.
And we are back. It is Isaiah. Welcome to the O&B Puckcast, episode number 193. Tonight we're going to go around the league with Lyle Richardson from SpectorsHockey.net, and we're really pleased to have him with us. But before we do that, just a little bit of housekeeping. Let's introduce our panel. And, of course, always with me, to my left, Chef B. How are you, man?
Very good. Very good. Just waiting for hockey to get back started. You're getting a little taste of some juniors now, and a little, I guess, Michkov clips have hit the interwebs. So it's not quite the best fix, but it's close enough for now for us.
Yeah, you got the summer showcase and the Sochi tournament, and there's a lot of tape out there. People are getting crazy with it. I told you he was good. And they're like, okay, it's a little exhibition. Calm down. Yeah, we all love him too. But also with us tonight is the great Dan Silver.
You're not going to dampen my Michkov mania, Isaiah. Unbelievable. We expected the goals and assists, but didn't expect him to be playing center. So that's something maybe we'll talk about a little bit. But it looks like he may be playing center this season.
Well, at least part of the time, that's for sure. And before we introduce our guests, just a reminder that the O&B Puckcast is brought to you by FlyersNittyGritty.com. And of course, you can follow the O&B Puckcast at O&B Puck, at O&B Puck on Twitter, at O&B Puckcast on Getter, our backup platform. And speaking of platforms, you can follow us on 12 of them podcast platforms: Apple, Spotify, iHeart, TuneIn, Amazon Audible, Google. We have a YouTube page. Just plug in there, O&B Puckcast will come up. We have a Facebook page. Check us out. And if you could follow or subscribe, whatever is appropriate for your format or platform, we'd appreciate it. Moves us up the charts when people are looking for a Philadelphia Flyer podcast, which is what we are. And just a reminder that we are doing a promo with DauberHockey.com. They have their 23-24 Dauber Hockey's Fantasy Hockey Guide, and they have the Ultimate Fantasy Package. All you have to do to win this, it's like a $30 value, okay? So listen up. Even if you're not in the fantasy, and Dan, you'll attest to this, there's such great information there on prospects, on projections for the season. I mean, you checked it out, right?
Oh, I checked it out. It was fantastic. I've got my fantasy draft coming up, and I was double checking all the prospects I have with their prospects, and they've got all kinds of great stuff. It's a great guide. It's worth every penny.
That's right. All you have to do to get it free, a free download, is just screenshot your review of our show on Apple Podcasts, right? You take a screenshot and DM us. The first 5 people to do that will be entered in a drawing, and one of you will win. And we're going to do this occasionally throughout the year. So check it out at DauberHockey.com without any further ado. From Spector's Hockey, he also works for The Guardian and Prince Edward Island, the Hockey News, and writes for the Bleacher Report as well. You know him, Lyle Richardson. How you doing, man?
Hey, I'm doing great, guys. Thanks for having me back on. It's becoming the annual off-season tradition, isn't it?
Yes, it is.
I pop on and we go around the horn, we go around the league, and we examine the carnage that is the off-season. So
this year was carnage, that's for sure. Well, I don't know what Pat came. It's Matt Dumba and Vladimir Tarasenko just snuck into Ottawa, on a 1-year deal or something. But yeah, there's no doubt about that. Before we get rolling with the teams, and we're all going to go through every team. It might take 30 seconds for some of them. It might take, 5 minutes for others. But before that, Lyle, that Andy Strickland on his Cam and Strick podcast talked about how this 2018 Hockey Canada investigation, where there was an alleged sexual assault, is culminating, and some charges and suspensions could come down to some players. He claims that on his podcast that there are 5 significant suspensions that could come out, and that could be announced any day. That could be whether it's this Friday or in 2-3 weeks. Tell us about what you've heard.
Well, basically, I mean, I've heard what pretty much everybody else has, that the NHL conducted its own investigation into this alleged. We have to be careful how we phrase it. This alleged incident that occurred with the members of Canada's World Junior team at a function in 2018, and after that, they would issue their report once it was completed, and then we would find out what their findings were and how they would respond. And thus far, it's been kept pretty much under wraps. Commissioner Bettman during both during the Stanley Cup final and during the draft, the lead up into the draft, was saying that boilerplate stuff that yes, we are conducting this investigation. We expect it to be released soon being anytime, and we would find out the results then. When these, I will say this, that with Andy Strickland, I mean, he's one of the more checked in, insiders. So if this is coming soon, I will take him at his word. When that will be, as you said, it could come on Friday. It could come next Friday. I will say this: if it's going to drop, it will drop on a Friday. Bad news tends to drop on a Friday, but that's just my anticipation. If it does come, basically, there's been a lot of speculation that there could be, as you alluded to, there could be several players, that current NHL players, who could end up facing suspensions. Whenever you spoke to any of the players in the past, they would just, they would not discuss it other than to say we are cooperating fully with the investigation, and just left it at that. So this thing's been kept very much under wraps for the most part. So, it's going to be interesting to see what happens. Truth be told, I was expecting this about 2 weeks ago. We were hearing a lot of rumblings up here in the Canadian press that, hey, this could be coming in mid-July, after all the excitement of free agency had died down. Well, it's early August and we still haven't seen it yet. So wait and see. But if we go by what Strick's saying, it's coming soon.
Would be our politicians could keep things this much under wraps, right?
I'll tell you, give the NHL credit. When they want to keep things under wraps, they keep it under wraps. But eventually it's gonna come out, because obviously they commissioned this thing. So bad news is going to come. If it drops in the middle of August on a Friday when nobody's looking.
Yeah, probably.
Yeah, I mean, real quick, I think the fly in the ointment about sort of the timing of this thing is that it's separate investigations. Just the NHL has conducted their own investigation, but there's also this criminal investigation ongoing. So let's say that the NHL comes out and announces a 20-game suspension for player X, but the official police investigation has not had any official findings. I could certainly see both the NHLPA and the lawyers for player X filing appeals, lawsuits, defamation, slander, all kinds of things, saying, hey, this official investigation hasn't concluded. We understand that the NHL is sort of a private entity and they can hand out their own suspensions, but what are you basing this off of? It's kind of could be a mess. So if this was just an issue of a player in a game doing something wrong, then the NHL can kind of announce it whenever they want. And this is a lot different. So I can understand why it's taking a long time. But I think that's why, as Lyle said, that maybe he was hearing 2 weeks ago something might drop. Now we're hearing maybe this week. I'm hearing a lot of that whenever they get close to announcing it, that they get this pushback, and the NHL is very cautious when it comes to anything with lawsuits. I mean, that's why with all the CTE concussion stuff with Bettman, they've been very careful about that stuff. I think because of, owners not wanting to be involved in the lawsuits. So, maybe it'll come out this Friday, maybe not, but there's just a lot of different things going on with it.
Well, just very quickly, further to what you were saying, Dan, the reason why I mentioned this thing about 2 weeks, about the whole thing about 2 weeks ago, is because that's when we started hearing some rumblings, and it actually made it into the news up here in the Canadian media that, as you were saying, there could be pushback from the NHLPA on the players' behalf, any of them that are named in this investigation, and if they end up facing any suspensions or anything like that. So that's why, like I said, we were starting to expect that, okay, mid-July was when we might see it, but that's come and gone since then. But regardless of when it drops, Dan, you're absolutely right. We can definitely expect some kind of response, like you said, from the player's agent, from the NHLPA, from their lawyers. So this is going to be if this goes off, it's going to be a very messy summer.
Yeah. Well, let's turn to some things that are a heck of a lot more fun. And Chef, you are up with the Pacific Division, and I know you were a closet San Jose Sharks fan for a long time. So
I still am.
They're your second favorite team, maybe. So you got these clubs, and go to it.
Okay, with San Jose, I like the turnaround that they're doing. They added Duclair, Burrows, Blackwood. Blackwood, who needed to change the scenery, let's be honest. So that's a good thing. We previewed him with Jason Martinez. Remember way back when we were talking about all the goalies coming out of the East, and we thought he had
Blackwood.
Yeah, and we thought he had a good chance to become somebody, and maybe he'll get that in San Jose. He might evolve to be a decent goalie in the future. But so they made a great pick in Will Smith, and I think he kind of fits what they're looking to do. He was the right pick for them. I think look for Duclair. I think he comes back. He bounces back. I think he's hurt with the Panthers, but he still had a pretty decent season. And then, look for like Lindblom, LeBlanc, and all that. They're playing for contracts. This is a contract, season for them. So they're playing for the money. So I would expect them to kind of elevate their little game of play. I think they'll be a fun team to watch. I think they'll be a little bit entertaining. It's still rough around the edges, but I pretty much think that they'll make an improvement a little bit more than last year anyway.
Lyle?
Well, I mean, I can't disagree with that assessment. I mean, of what the Sharks are rebuilding, and the big issue for them, I think, is and I think it's certainly dominated the rumor mill. It's dominating the off season. Is when are they going to trade Erik Karlsson and to where? With all the speculation suggesting that it's going to be the Pittsburgh Penguins, that they're the front runners, and that's where they're going to end up. Sorry, Flyers fans. You guys who cares? But and once they do trade Karlsson, there's talk that Mike Grier might also look at maybe bolstering that roster, because he'll have cleared a fair bit of cap space, even if he has to retain a healthy chunk of that salary. There's talk maybe Matt Dumba, we might sign him. It may look at bringing in another experienced player, maybe somebody like Thomas Tatar, who's still available. Guys that are, as they would call, they're devalued assets, but they still have, potential, or, they're coming off rough seasons, and, maybe a change of venue might help them out.
These guys have got to be the favorites to be one of the worst teams in the league, right?
Well, yeah. I mean, given what they're doing, I mean, it's very obvious they're rebuilding, especially if they move Carlson. I mean, the guy who was their leading scorer. I mean, how often you see that a defenseman who's a leading scorer with over 100 points? I mean, talk about your early 90s flashback. But yeah, you trade him. They were already bad. They're just going to get worse.
It sounds like from what I was reading today that Mike Greer is having a real tough time getting any kind of value, anything close to what he thought he was going to get for Carlson. And that some teams even think that based on his $11.5 million contract for the next 4 seasons, that it's almost like a negative value type of scenario. I mean, is there a big gap between what Greer has been trying to get and the actual value out there for this guy?
Well, I dare say there is a gap. I mean, how big it is, I mean, that's the subject of conjecture. Nobody really seems to know. There is the speculation. There are, the whispers and so on from different insiders. Basically, what it comes down to is the Sharks have set their price. The interested clubs like the Penguins, and now I would say the Hurricanes, though to a much lesser degree since they signed Tony DeAngelo. I think they're out now. But whatever teams are involved besides the Penguins, they've set their value. The one thing I will say, I agree with Elliot Friedman of Sportsnet when he says the more salary that the Sharks are willing to retain, the better the return. If they're only looking at retaining 20%, teams are just going to be like, well, you're going to have to do better than that, or this is all we're going to give you. They're going to squeeze them. Let's be honest. Carlson, his trade value will never be better than it is right now. But the unfortunate thing is they're trying to move him in an off season where the salary cap is flattened. So that means there are very few teams with the cap space and the tradable assets that can take him on. Even at 20% of his cap hit reduced. So, it's going to reach a point. He's going to have to move him. They're going to have to accept the best thing that they can get and move on. And I would say if you're a Sharks fan, you should probably, accept that it's more important to get him off your books and as much of that off your books as possible. And hey, at least you got a pretty good return for Timo Meier back at the trade deadline. So,
You got it. Chef, who's that next up on your list there?
Let's see. Let's do the Oilers, I guess. They what we're talking about, they didn't really do anything. They got a little better. They got rid of Yamamoto and added Brown, but does that really change anything? I mean, to me, it's like almost dead even. There isn't much change here, and I don't expect to see anything. I still think they get to the playoffs, but I don't see they did anything to really change what any kind of outcome is if they want to get over that hump.
Yeah, I again, you're right. I mean, they did very little, but by the same token, though, if you talk to people in Edmonton, though, they really didn't feel that their team needed to do all that much. First of all, they got limited cap room. I mean, they were pressed for cap space as it is. I mean, they managed to get Ryan McLeod. They avoided arbitration with him earlier this week. They got him re-signed at a decent deal. Leaves them with, I think, $3.5 million in cap space, so they can sign Evan Bouchard. To probably it's going to probably just be a bridge deal for maybe around $3 million a season, with the promise that he'll get much more, down the road when the cap goes up much higher, and if he continues playing as well as he did alongside Matthias Ekholm. But you look at their performance in the playoffs, and I mean, yeah, it was disappointing that they only got as far as the second round this time around, and they fell to the Golden Knights. But there was a feeling though that some bounces here and there, that it was more a case of bounces going against them, not so much as the Golden Knights really outplaying them. It's just that some of the bounces didn't go their way. Now, I would suggest, though, that, maybe a little bit of a better goaltender might have helped. But, they've got Stuart Skinner. They're stuck with Jack Campbell. He's not going anywhere. And, in fact, they should have stuck with Jack Campbell. I would say in that postseason, the problem was their coach was too much in love with Stuart Skinner and didn't really have enough trust in Jack Campbell. But every time they pulled Skinner and put in Campbell shone. So why he didn't get a start going beyond that, ask the coach. But the feeling, though, with the Oilers, again, just to sum it up quickly, they really didn't feel they needed to make any significant changes. So they shed a bit of salary, yeah. They had to move a couple of players, but players that didn't really have that much of a significant impact. So they're basically they're coming back with the same bunch next year, and they think that especially with a healthier Evander Kane, that they're going to have a much better outcome.
Okay.
One couple of things about the Oilers. It'll be interesting to see. There were some rumors about Travis Konechny, how he would be a perfect winger to play with McDavid or Draisaitl, and that's probably true. The problem is that I don't know what the Oilers really have to offer that could entice the Flyers to giving up a guy like Konechny, because they're not going to have any early first-round picks, and they don't really have any prospects I think that Danny Briere would be all that interested in. So that's sort of a interesting thing to keep an eye out as the season goes on. And then I'm interested, Lyle, in your comment about Stuart Skinner. Obviously, Skinner was statistically and probably to the eye test much better in the regular season.
Oh, absolutely.
Than
yes.
Campbell, but in the playoffs, Skinner was kind of a disaster. What do you think is their outlook going into the season? Like, how are they looking at their goalies? Are they looking at it as like a 1A, 1B or a 1-2 type of thing?
It's going to be 1A, 1B going into this thing. I would anticipate we're going to see a bounce back from Jack Campbell. Last season, that was rough. He changed teams. He didn't really want to leave Toronto. I think he was kind of upset about how that basically that the Leafs didn't want him after he had, let's face it, he gave them 2 solid seasons there. So a bit of an adjustment period there. But again, you look at his performance in the playoffs, and when he was called upon, he stepped up and was brilliant. So which is why I was wondering why Woodcroft didn't go with him, start giving him some starts when it was obvious that Skinner was struggling, But I think it's going to be a 1A, 1B situation. And if both goalies are playing well, hey, that's all the better for the Oilers.
Absolutely. Chef?
So since you mentioned Vegas and giving them the early bump out of there, I'll jump down to them. Defending champs, what can I say? They added really nothing, but they did shed, Riley Smith, Brousseau, Quick, and Bluger. Is that how you say his name?
Yeah.
Okay, I wasn't sure. All right, and so Smith, I guess, is the only real thing that they're probably going to miss out of it. I guess he was one of the original misfits. He's the only real loss, I think, but it shouldn't matter. I mean, this team, when it came down to it, they bared down. They were a good team. They still are a good team in all this. So I think they're still contenders for the Cup. I think you'll see them probably hunting for a conference championship at least.
Oh yeah, you can never dismiss a defending Stanley Cup champion, that's for sure, unless they've blown up the whole team, which they really didn't do. They'll miss Riley Smith to a degree, but I mean, if they've got, if Mark Stone is back fully healthy and they get a fully healthy season out of him, if Aiden Hill continues playing well between the pipes, but it's basically goaltending by committee anyway, with Logan Thompson in there as well. They've got a solid defense core. I mean, that to me was I think probably the most unheralded key, if you will. I mean, all the focus was on Aiden Hill and on Mark Stone and, some of the misfits like Marcia Show, who played fantastic, by the way. I mean, he deserved the Conn Smythe. But that blue line was the real cornerstone of their success. With Pietrangelo, obviously, Che Theodore. You got the young guys like Hagen and White Cloud coming on. As long as you got a healthy, deep blue line like that, I mean, that's going to carry you. So it's going to be tough for them, obviously, to repeat. It's never easy, but hey, I got to agree with Chef. I definitely think they're a top 4 team again in the Western Conference.
One interesting thing to me about Vegas is that I read an article today, I think on The Athletic, about how they're one of the only teams since the cap era that has won the Cup that hasn't had at least one player that was on an entry-level contract. Because obviously when you're, trying to construct a roster in the salary cap era, it's very helpful if you can have a guy like, let's say, just an example, a Matthew Nyes, like on Toronto, right, who's going to be on an entry-level contract. One guy who's one of my favorite under-the-radar prospects, who doesn't make a whole lot of lists, who I'm really interested to see what Vegas does with. They've got a defenseman named Lucas Cormier, who's a very good offensive defenseman. And he kind of reminds me a little bit of Shane Gostisbehere a little bit. Hopefully he's a little bit better defensively than Ghost was here in Philly. But I'm kind of interested to see if they have some injuries on defense or if he kind of shines in training camp, if Cormier gets a chance for anyone who plays, fantasy hockey, to see maybe if this kid is able to this year, maybe next year, break into the lineup on an ELC and be a real power play contributor. So just wanted to kind of mention that.
Oh yeah, I mean they're a very interesting team. They trade away their draft picks. They trade away their prospect pool is one of the worst in the league because they've traded so many of them away. But it worked. They wanted to build a champion quickly. That's how they did it. I don't think that's sustainable over the long haul. Of course, eventually that's going to catch up with them. But you can't argue with the results in the short term.
Yeah,
Absolutely.
Okay, so since, speaking of surprise, I guess it was a kind of a surprise for a lot of people for them to be there at the end. But the Kraken, now as a Flyers fan, this one befuddled me for last year. I mean, it hurt my soul because Dave Haxtell is their coach, and I laugh about it. But you know what? And as me as Isaiah spoke off air he did learn from his mistakes, and he kind of hunkered down a little bit, and he actually got some promise with that team there. I think Matty Beniers, he's going to continue to grow. But all of it, I think, and it comes down to it, and I think Dan will agree with me here, it all could get derailed for his fanboy love, Haxtell's fanboy love of Pierre-Edouard Bellemare. So I think he'll still minutes away. As a Flyers fan, we'll probably all think he'll be on like the top line by the end of the season, and so killing penalties, power play, everything. So, but the Kraken, I think they'll be entertaining again. I think they file in the middle, but overall, I think all jokes aside, I think he's done a decent job. I can't hold a grudge forever.
Well, Coach of the Year finalist, So I mean, hey. Right, that's something. He still definitely believes in a defensive system. I mean, and the one thing I would worry about though, if you're a Kraken fan, is I'd worry about the goaltending. It was Grubauer and Marty Jones last year. And Jones is gone. Group because of course he departed as a free agent, and Grubauer is still on that contract. But Grubauer, he's a starter, but he needs somebody to really share the duties with him. He needs a 1B in there, and I really don't see it with who they've got right now. But that doesn't mean that Ron Francis won't go looking for maybe somebody a little more reliable to put in a backup spot there.
Yeah, that could be something to watch. Yeah, because they took some losses. They lost Sprung and Carson Soucy and Morgan Geeky and Ryan Donato, and they probably didn't have what's coming back is not probably as good, but they have so many young players, and
that's who their focus is going to be on, Isaiah, because their prospect pool actually, and again, Ron Francis, and I said this last year, he's done a fantastic job taking a prospect pool from nothing and just building it up to where you're pulling out some promising young players there. With obviously Matty Beniers being there, that is going to help you out. No. Sorry, I tongue-tied in his last name. But Matty Beniers. But, even if they miss the playoffs again this year or miss it this year, it won't be by much. They'll be, like Chef was saying, they'll be competitive. They'll be entertaining. And you don't want to sleep on them, obviously. But they're still, I think Ron Francis is sticking with the game plan. Keep building it up. Get your younger players in there. And if they can just improve the goaltending, though, they'll still be, I think, in contention for a playoff spot.
A couple quick hits on the Kraken. So one is I find it ironic that their leading goal scorer, Jared McCann, who scored 40 goals, was basically given away by Ron Hextall. So you basically had Hextall helping out his buddy Haxtell by basically giving away this guy who scored 40 goals this past season. I think the Penguins probably wish they had him back. Shane Wright's going to be an interesting one to watch this year. He was, a lot of people thought he was going to go number 1 last year. He ended up dropping down to number 4. He's kind of been up and down. I believe that the same thing is true this year, that he either has to be in the NHL or sent back to the WHL. So that's going to be a really interesting decision to see what happens with Shane Wright in training camp. Just watching him in the World Juniors last year, I'm not 100% sure that he's a kid who's ready to be an NHL regular. So he may end up getting sent back to the WHL. That'll be interesting.
I do know, Dan, just to interrupt to your point, though, the Kraken are filing to have an exemption for him, so that he'll be able to go to the AHL, to their farm club, and because that's where he went. After his WHL season ended last year, he went and joined their team during the playoffs, Coachella Valley, and he played well for them. So they would like to keep him there, but you're right, there is that whole thing of that he could end up back to the WHL, but they're going to try, but they're filing for an exemption, and they're hoping that passes. So
do you know what that exemption is based upon, though?
Well, they're trying to. Well, the whole thing is that he would be ineligible by one game. He fell one game short. Okay, from that whole it's that whole rule with the WHL. It's actually the WHL falls under the CHL, the Canadian Hockey League, which covers all of the junior leagues. And the whole stipulation was he needed to play a certain amount of CHL games last season in order to, now you're done with your CHL commitment and you can go on now and either be in the NHL or the AHL, but he fell one game short. So that's what they're basing this whole thing for the exemption on, saying, look, come on, one game, right?
Yeah, but I don't think us Flyers fans learned with the Tony DeAngelo trade that the league doesn't care about. They voided the Tony DeAngelo trade because it was made like a day too early. Like I don't know if that argument's going to hold water. I guess we'll see. But
to your point though, with the Tony DeAngelo thing with the trade though, that's an NHL CBA thing, right? And this whole thing with Shane Wright, that's a CHL. That's a completely different thing. So that might be why that could fly, because you're right. If the NHL had any control about it, we all know sticklers for details, and it would be like one game short. Well, you should have thought of that beforehand.
Yeah. Interesting. All right.
Yeah. It will.
I guess we'll see what happens there.
Yeah. Moving along to the next squad there.
The Kings. To me, they didn't really move the needle. Maybe they're all marginally better. To me, I don't think. To borrow a phrase from Isaiah, they left me wanting.
Really?
So I don't. Yeah, I don't think. Yeah, I don't think so.
Interesting.
Yeah, I feel a little bad for DB. I mean, because what, they got knocked out by the Oilers last year, right?
Right.
Okay, so I don't think that changes. I don't think they did anything better if the Oilers didn't change and the Kings didn't really change either.
Well,
what makes it different?
You got Pierre-Luc Dubois in a big trade.
Oh, sugar. Yeah. I missed that. Oh,
yeah.
Well, oops. Well, guess what? I don't think so. I'm still sticking to my guns. I think they're going to be out first round. I'll say that.
You should, Chef, you should have just said, no, I knew they did Dubois, and I'm still not convinced.
I'm still, all right there. Still.
We'll edit it out in the dub. Don't worry.
So,
I'm not convinced, by the way, that Pierre-Luc Dubois is going to be that much better than Gabe Velarde is going to be this year. I mean,
I know, but
it's better comedy if I mess up.
No, but seriously, Dan, follow on with that. You
okay. Gabe
Velarde's a really good. Go ahead, Isaac.
Oh, we got him. Okay.
Yeah. All right. The Kings. Even with Pierre-Luc Dubois, they still didn't move the needle. I still don't think they're going to be good. I don't like the Kings because my closet team is the Sharks. So there, and I just don't think. I feel bad for DB, but they didn't do enough, in my opinion, to be able to knock the Oilers off their pedestal. Okay, because they didn't do it last year. I don't think they're going to do it this year. Since that's just my opinion. I know you guys have other ideas, but there.
Well, one thing I will say, though, Chef, to your point, bringing on Pierre-Luc Dubois, I think does. I mean, it gives them a very deep, three centers. I mean, let's face it, with Kopitar, you got Dubois on the second line. You'll have Philip Dano there who can jump up under the second line if Dubois gets injured. My concern, though, with them is their goaltending, and that was an issue last season and the season before. They brought in Korpisalo at the trade deadline. He played pretty good for them. They opted, though, not to re-sign him, and they brought in an aging Cam Talbot who, I think his best years, last season kind of showed. I know he was hurt, but, he's 35, got a lot of mileage on him, and I don't think he's the guy. you want to talk about moving the needle, I don't think he's the guy who does that for you in goal. You got Phoenix Copley there. Now he played well for them as in a backup role, and I think he can still do that. I don't see him, though, being the guy who's going to carry your water for you if your main guy gets injured. So, even though they brought in Dubois, which I think definitely makes them more powerful, offensively, and provides, a bit more of a physical edge up front as well. And their defense is still solid, but I think their goaltending is going to be their Achilles heel again, unless they do something to address that.
I'm with Chef, by the way, that, I'm not convinced that Pierre-Luc Dubois, who, first of all, I'm always skeptical of guys like him who are complain after being with several different teams. I don't know. It just kind of rubs me the wrong way. Gabriel Velarde is a, top draft pick who's finally coming along. I mean, I wouldn't be shocked if he puts up better numbers than Pierre-Luc Dubois this season. But I will say the one big addition that the Kings are probably going to have is they're adding one of the best young defensemen in hockey, who's Brant Clark, who was a top 10 pick in the draft a couple of years ago. He averaged 2 points per game in the Canadian juniors last year as a defenseman. I mean, he is a wildly talented offensive defenseman, kind of in the mold of a Drew Doughty. I would not be shocked if he has a big season and kind of forces his way into a little bit of rookie of the year contention. So I think that's going to be a big addition for them. But I agree with Lyle, like their goaltending is going to be a problem. And if I was betting over-unders on various teams, I would look at betting the under on the Kings, because I think they might underperform compared to what the expectations will be with the buzz of the Pierre-Luc Dubois trade.
Yeah, that their situation just screams midseason or trade deadline acquisition and goal. But we'll see.
Yep.
Mm-hmm.
All right, Calgary. They had probably one of the worst fourth lines in the whole league, and they kind of fixed that by moving on from Lewis and Lucic, but it just makes them a little bit better. I think just a little bit. I think they'll be a little competitive, but until like Isaiah just said now, that look for their moves at the deadline for them, because I think they're going to need a little bit more to get over that hump. A new coach and all that. I don't see it though. I just think that they need something to rally, I guess, behind, because last year they weren't a team. They were all a bunch of yelling, and this is what in my opinion, that's what they need. They need something to bring it all together, kind of like the Major League movie.
Yeah. Well, they brought in, they changed management, bring in Craig Conroy, who's much more of a personable, because former player himself, changed the coaching. I mean, basically by just firing Daryl Sutter and promoting an assistant. I mean, but evidently if there's happy vibes about that, bringing in Jerome McGinley, into the front office as well. I think that's going to help them, but this is a team, guys, that I think can go either way here, because you've got all this drama going on with Elias Lindholm, Michael Backlund, and Noah Hannafin, because they're all a year away from unrestricted free agency. Hannafin's already told them that he's not going to resign. Lindholm and Backlund are still kind of humming and hawing. They haven't made a decision yet. Meanwhile, you've got Jonathan Huberdeau, who really slumped badly last season in his first year with the Flames, coming from 100+ point career best season to, I think he got 57 points or something like that, 55 points. Not a very good, not what was expected when they traded for him. So there's that. Jacob Markstrom, who was a Vezina finalist the year before, he really had his ups and downs. Maybe bringing in a promising goalie like Dustin Wolf, maybe that kind of helps light a fire under him, maybe, possibly, perhaps. But it can go one of two ways. I mean, they already traded away Tyler Toffoli. So, Hannafin still might go, but I wouldn't be surprised if you see him in the lineup when the season starts, and then maybe it'll kind of be, okay, let's see how the season progresses. They're playing it. They built this team up, to your point, Chef. Yeah, they've improved the fourth line. They got rid of the aging guys, and yeah, they're bringing in better depth guys. But ultimately here, it's just going to be, which way are they going to go? If they get off to a bad start by midseason, you're going to start seeing some wholesale changes. Right now, They're looking at, we'll reset and hope for the best. So,
Yep.
See how it goes.
Okay.
All right, Canucks. I guess the best word for the Canucks is bleh. I mean, for me, really, I mean, what do you call it? Burrows is on the outs. OEL is what? He's a shell of what he was. He's lost his mojo. They have good.
Now. He's gone. To
yeah,
Florida.
Well, he's gone.
yeah,
So that's
I know. But like, there's nothing exciting about them anymore. They're not to me anyway. I'm just. It's a boring team. It's like whenever I put them on last season, it was like, after dark, NHL after dark for us people we're on the East Coast in case you haven't guessed, but Flyers after dark or NHL after dark, it was always a boring game when they played. It was, even if it was, they were playing a good, exciting team, but just it hampered down. If the Canucks were a color, they'd be like mud brown, like very boring. I don't know. And maybe like them old uniforms they had, remember? So, I mean, in this case, I guess it's appropriate. They do nothing. I have no interest in them.
Well, they got two pieces though, and Pedersen and Quinn Hughes. I mean, that's what's better than what the Flyers have currently on their roster anyway.
Yeah, it's just boring to me.
To be fair though, and to Chef's point though, I mean they've had Quinn Hughes and Pedersen now for some time, and they've been spinning their wheels. Now, part of that's had to do with a revolving door of coaches and front office upheaval. They sort of solidified that and stabilized that last year. They brought in Rick Tocchet as their coach, and they performed better under Rick Tocchet in the second half of the season, though, mind you, the year before they performed better in the second half of the season under Bruce Boudreau. So is this really sign of improvement, or is it just going to be more of the same? They do have some quality talent there. If Thatcher Demko, their starting goalie, if he stays healthy, they've got a real shot here. And Elijah and Pedersen, I mean, my God, he had his breakout performance last season. He really did. And, they still have JT Miller. He had a down season last year a bit, but he still can put up solid numbers, still is plays a solid two-way game. If they can, if their defense improves at all, if it's not just Quinn Hughes and the rest by committee, they should be able to make some improvement. I don't see them as a playoff team yet, but they could be maybe knocking on the door, maybe scare some teams. We'll see what a full season under Rick Tocchet does.
Yeah, should be interesting.
Finally, the Ducks. I guess I like them a lot more now. I mean, everything's an upgrade this year. Killhorn, they needed help on the power play. They got that out there with Killhorn, but Haig is the big addition. Robert Haig. I mean, we loved him in Philly. I think that's the big addition. Just joking. They might have overthought the NHL draft when they took and they're banking on Leo Carlson to be the big guy, to be their guy. I mean, a lot of people talked about Fantilli being he's pretty much ready to play almost, and then you have Carlson who might need a little tweaking. And if you were looking to make a difference, but they do have other great pieces in there in Anaheim, and I think that they're a fun team to watch. They're the opposite of like Calgary to me. I'll always stay up late, watch a San Jose game, even a Kings game. Kraken last year were very entertaining, and so are the Ducks. Even though they weren't that great, they were all over the place. But at least their guys are everywhere. Like there's effort from that team, and even if individual effort from the players. But I think they'll be fun. I think hopefully they in their minds that they made the right decision. But we'll see.
Well, yeah, exactly. Well, I mean, that's the way it goes with most first-round draft picks. But in Carlson's defense, though, he comes very highly recommended, and he really impressed me, in the World Juniors. So a lot of people. But you're right, though. I mean, they do have some good young pieces in there. I mean, they just signed Troy Terry to a 7-year deal this week. There's still Trevor Zegras they got to get under contract, but that'll get done. This is going to be the second full season under Pat Verbeek as the general manager. They're still rebuilding, but I mean, if Jamie Drysdale, they missed him for most of last season because he was injured on the blue line. He comes back and he's healthy. That's going to improve things as well. Still rebuilding, but rebuilding teams can be fun, as Chef pointed out, and the Ducks should be entertaining again going forward, and we should see some improvement, I think, out of them. Again, not a playoff club, but they should improve.
Yeah, I mean, the Ducks, it was very clearly were in full-on tank mode last year, leaving Dallas Eakins as head coach. They probably knew he's not that great of a head coach, so they were in full-on tank mode. They got, hopefully, their franchise center. They've got a trio of extremely talented young defense prospects. You mentioned Jamie Drysdale, who's already seen some NHL time. I think my favorite NHL defense prospect right now is Olin Zellweger, who's basically like a breakout machine, and just incredible also from the blue line in, a very good offensive defenseman. We'll see if he makes their squad or not this year, but he's going to be a power play monster for years to come. And Pavel Mintyukov, who's a year behind Olin Zellweger, might even be better than Zellweger as an all-around defenseman. So they've got some really good young defensemen coming. I really like Lucas Dostal, their young goalie. They've got a lot to build around. They've got Zegras, Mason McTavish, Leo Carlson.
Yes.
So the future is bright, I think, in Anaheim. And they if not this year, they'll be entertaining this year, but I think that they'll start being more entertaining and should become a pretty good team here within the next 3 seasons.
Yeah. I mean, one of the things about Carlson, I heard a scout or somebody referring to a scout on a show talking about the rationale is that Carlson really hasn't even grown into his body, and look where he's at, as opposed to Fantilli. He might have peaked out. I mean, what we see, it might be what we get with Fantilli, which is fantastic. But when you consider the makeup of what Anaheim has, a lot of guys like Zegras and McTavish and a lot of, high-skilled players. Sometimes if you throw in a Kopitar kind of player into the mix, you get a better blend. If you're talking about contending for a championship and being able to win big games, they're very, very, I guess, impressed with Carlson's maturity, and they think that physically he has much more room to grow in that regard relative to Fantilli, who may be close to physically mature. So, I mean, that kind of makes sense.
Yeah, well, I don't think you could have gone wrong either way. I mean, everybody was expecting them to take Fantilli. When they took Carlson, I was just like, ooh, okay, yeah, that's good too. So,
I mean, at that juncture, it was like, well, I'm ready for a surprise, because at that point we're just hoping that Mishkov would drop back to the Flyers, and that was kind of like the first little indication. Maybe there's something going on. Maybe it's in the karma tonight. So anyway, so Dan, if you want to hit the Atlantic Division, we go across, and see what you got there.
Yeah, let's start with the record-setting Boston Bruins, who fizzled in the playoffs. They have got, I was reading, some various things. They've been ranked as the least improved team on a number of websites. I was looking at EP Ringside's website. They do a good job. Listed the Bruins as least improved. They've got a lot of subtractions. Taylor Hall gone, Dmitry Orlov gone. Those are 2 really good players. David Krejci, Tyler Bertuzzi. I mean, those are 4 very good hockey players. And then you add to that Patrice Bergeron retired, and you're looking at a team that, you can never count out the Bruins, because they just always find a way to be good. And they still have David Pastrnak and Brad Marchand and Charlie McAvoy and 2 really good goaltenders. But if you look at what's out versus what's in, and you look at, they signed JVR, as Flyers fans, we know what to expect from JVR. He's going to disappear for half the season. He'll score some meaningless goals, and we know what's going to happen there. Kevin Shattenkirk still got some good hockey to be played. Morgan Geekie, and they added back Milan Lucic, who'd been there, obviously for a long time. But the Bruins, to me, look like they've got to be the heavy favorite to have the largest negative points differential from their 132 points, 135 points this past season to whatever they're going to have this season. They may still make the playoffs, but their points are going to drop a lot. I don't know, Lyle, if that's kind of what you're looking at.
Well, I really can't disagree with that assessment, Dan, because you mentioned all the guys that have come out of that line. And don't forget, David Krejci's got to probably be next as well. He'll probably, the word today is probably he's looking at probably going to be retiring. Hang him up, except he'll go and play for the Czechia national team next year in the World Championships, and that'll be that for him. But I can't disagree with that. You look at how many players they wound up having to cut ties with, and it was all for salary cap reasons. It was all because of the salary cap. That's why we were hearing all these rumors of they could trade Jake DeBrusk, they could trade Linus Ullmark, and they didn't very wisely. But they wound up, having to cut a lot of guys for cap reasons, and they're going to be a big drop off. Like I said, they'll still battle for a playoff spot. They have enough talent to make it in, but it's going to be a big drop off from what we saw last season.
So next we'll look at the Toronto Maple Leafs. They finished second in the division last year with 111 points, lost to the Panthers in the second round. Their fans were celebrating like they won the Stanley Cup after they got through the first round. Unfortunately, then Matthew Tkachuk and the Panthers came along. They had an interesting offseason. They subtracted Michael Bunting, Ryan O'Reilly, Eric Gustafson, Alex Kerfoot, Justin Holl, Luke Shen, and Noel Achari. Some pretty good players there. Ryan O'Reilly obviously was an acquisition they made last year. Who brought a lot to their lineup, a lot of scoring and grit. Michael Bunting was kind of a perfect complement as a cheap complement on, I think he, had been on an ELC to play with some of their top line guys, but their replacements are pretty good. I think maybe a lot of people think that one of the best acquisitions of the offseason was them getting Tyler Bertuzzi, who is sort of a Travis Konechny type of player. He's going to add a lot of scoring, a lot of grit, a lot of sandpaper. He's a great, acquisition for them. John Klingberg, we'll see if he can kind of get his career back on track. A couple years ago, he was thought of as one of the better offensive defensemen in the league. Max Domi, who had a great playoff push, he's been added. And of course, Ryan Reeves, who people have varying opinions on. But I think it's kind of to be determined what happens with the Leafs this year. Their goaltending to me is still a big question mark. They've got Ilya Samsonov, who they took to arbitration, and he ended up, getting that 1-year deal. Joseph Woll is right now projected to potentially be their backup, hasn't played a lot of NHL games. He's a team that Toronto's a team that if the Flyers end up moving Carter Hart at some point, Toronto would be the team, I think, that would be at the top of the list that might be looking for a guy like that. But they're an interesting team. They still have the big four, obviously, Matthews, Tavares, Marner, and Nylander. So with those four guys, they're obviously going to be very good. We'll see how the additions and subtractions kind of result with them.
Yeah, I can't really add anything to that other than the goaltending, though. I have to say I was impressed with their goaltending in the playoff. I liked how Samsonov performed. I liked how Wall performed. He went into a tough situation when Samsonov got hurt. He handled it very well. So there's promise there. Of course, promise doesn't always pan out, but, the goaltending could surprise. For me, it's just, I like the grit that they added, but is it going to be enough? Because this team, it's not just enough to, we'll take this piece in and move that piece out. It's, does this team have a proper winning culture? They have the talent. They've addressed their weaknesses. They're a better team now than they were 5 years ago, and they've only got one playoff series win to show for it. So this season, I think, is going to be a big one for them. If they don't go deep this year, there's going to be significant changes.
And one other thing before I move on to the next team is that I'd mentioned Matthew Nyes earlier as a guy on an ELC who should be able to be a real big contributor. I think he's still eligible for the Calder Trophy Rookie of the Year. He's going to be a guy to watch out for because he'll be among that top two lines in Toronto most likely, and he's a very gifted offensive player. So he could make some noise there on an ELC and really contribute. So the next team I've got is the Tampa Bay Lightning. They won a couple cups in a row. Last year, they finished just under 100 points, 98 points. And, they had it was them in Toronto in the first round, right? And they had a really good matchup, and Toronto ended up winning that one. Tampa team that, if you look at their additions and subtractions, Alex Killorn, who Chef talked about, left. Ian Cole, Ross Colton, Corey Perry, Patrick Maroon, and Pierre-Edouard Bellemare. The additions, Connor Sheary, Calvin DeHaan, Josh Archibald, Logan Brown, Luke Glendening. So really, if you look at it, there's not a lot of big name changes other than maybe Alex Killorn being out and Russ Colton and Corey Perry and Patrick Maroon, who kind of were third, fourth line guys who helped them win cups. But they've still got they've still got Kucherov, Braden Point, Stamkos, Anthony Cirelli, Hedman, Sergachev, Vasilevsky. So they're still going to be a good team. I think the question mark is, how good are they going to be able to compete with the top teams in that division? And probably, yes, with the Bruins probably going to be taking a step back. So the bottom line for me with Tampa is, as long as they've got those 4 or 5 really good players, I think they're going to be a team that's, going to make the playoffs and is going to have a chance to make a Stanley Cup push. Yeah,
just not as solid of a chance as they had 2-3 years ago, because the salary cap has really been just a death by 1,000 cuts for them. Every year they lose core guys, secondary guys, I should say. And this year was no different. And they're still talented enough to make the playoffs. They could probably win a round or two. I'm no longer convinced, though, this team has the horses to be able to go all the way to the Stanley Cup again.
One interesting thing will be Steven Stamkos is an unrestricted free agent at the end of this season. If they are struggling a little bit, do they look at maybe trying to move him to get some assets? I doubt it. I'm guessing that they'll probably, be in a good situation, and they'll probably want to finish out his career in Tampa. Just something to look out for. Mm-hmm. Next team in that division we'll look at is the Stanley Cup runner-ups, the Florida Panthers, who had that miraculous push. It's funny. I really liked the Panthers in the playoffs last year. When they went down in the first round, whatever it was, 3-1, I had the thought of betting them to win the cup because the odds were so astronomical, and I didn't do it. But if I had, I would have been pretty upset with them losing in the finals. I guess I could have bet them getting to the finals. But they're a team that I've always sort of liked. I like a lot of the players on their team. In terms of who was in and who was out for the Panthers, out is Anthony Duclair and Radko Gudas. Gudas was a pretty good player performer for them. In Evan Rodriguez, Dmitry Kulikov, Oliver Ekman-Larsson, Nico Mikkola, Steven Lawrence. The big thing for the Florida Panthers is the number of injuries that they have going into this season. Obviously, Matthew Tkachuk had the broken sternum or whatever it was. Aaron Ekblad, Brandon Montour, those guys are going to be out for a sizable chunk to start this season. So they've got some injuries, but they're still, I think they're going to benefit from that push. I think that they've got one of the guys who I think could take a next step towards NHL stardom is Anton Lundell. Mm-hmm. He got a lot of comparisons to Alexander Barkov when he came in the league. He's been good. He's 21 years old. He's been very good. I think the playoff experience that Lundell had playing a lot of big minutes, we may see him take a big step forward this coming season. They're going to need it with some of the injuries, but he's a guy that I would look for there. I think Flyers fans are going to be interested in what happens with the Panthers because the Flyers have the Panthers' first-round pick this season. It was funny, the Panthers traded their first-round pick last year to the Canadiens for the big defenseman. I always forget his name. Ben Sherratt, yeah, Ben Sherratt. And I think Canadiens fans were just ripping their hair out as Florida kept advancing and seeing their first-round pick turn into basically almost a second-round pick. But so I think Flyers fans, I think that we're probably going to get a decent pick from that first-round pick. We'll see what happens. But so that's the storyline for me. Still a really good team. Some injury question marks, but also some young guys who kind of could take the next step. So I think Florida's going to be pretty solid this year.
Yeah, my only concern, Dan, is just how big will the absence of those key guys to injuries to start the season, how big of an impact will that have, and how well can they adjust to that short turnaround? Because that's just murder nowadays for every Stanley Cup finalist. It's just brutal, But if they can weather that early season storm, and as you said, young guys like Lundell step up, then they'll be okay. Then, I can still see them. I don't see them repeating or, getting to the Stanley Cup final again, but I could certainly see them being a playoff contender again.
Next team just missed the playoffs last year. They've got one of the best assortments of young talent in the entire league is the Buffalo Sabres. They really didn't do much this offseason. Not a whole lot out, not a whole lot in, but they're a team that really all they need to make the playoffs is they just need some of these kids to hit the next level. I mean, you talk about Rasmus Dahlin and Owen Power, two of the best young defensemen in the league. Those guys, the potential is just absolutely sky high. Obviously, Dahlin's already capitalizing on that potential, putting up huge numbers. Owen Power, 20 years old, could take a big step forward. Up front, Tage Thompson just became a star/superstar last year with his finishing ability, his shot volume. And then you look at guys like Dylan Cousins, who could take the next step, Peyton Krebs. So they've got some really good young players. Casey Middlestat, sort of under the radar, really improved last year. He was a guy who I think took some time to adjust to the NHL level of play, but I think there's some upside still with him. I loved what they did in the draft with Zach Benson, maybe one of the steals of the first round, getting him in the teens. And they've got a really, really good young goalie in Devin Levi, who was just an absolute stud in college at Northeastern, who might be ready to be an NHL starter soon. So we'll see. They've got a couple goalies that are in their last year, but I think Devin Levi is going to get a decent shot there. So they're a team that I wouldn't put them in the Stanley Cup contender category yet, but I think that they probably have a really good chance at making the playoffs this season. And so they're a team that's going to be fun to watch, and we'll just have a lot of good young players to look at.
Absolutely. And just for me, again, it comes down to goaltending for them. I know Devin Levi, he looked very good in his short brief appearances there last season. But they still also have Ukko-Pekka Luukkonen in there as well, and Eric Comrie. So it's going to be interesting to see, what shakes out of that, who's going to be the starter, and are they going to be capable of carrying this team into the playoffs? Their defense, though, should be better. I like the additions of Eric Johnson and Clifton Connor. They'll bring experience to the blue line on that bottom pairing. So, but no question, they're going to be entertained. I got to be honest, man. I was pulling for them last year. They were so much fun to watch, and it was so sad to see them just kind of fall apart down the stretch, because they were so close. But there's a lot of exciting young talent on that team, and this could be a big breakout year if the goaltending can be sorted out.
Next team, home of the Flyers' former captain, Claude Giroux, the Ottawa Senators. They were looking to make a playoff push last year. They really staggered down the stretch, and they're kind of in the middle of the pack in terms of what they added, what they subtracted. But the big subtraction is Alex DeBrincat, who obviously is a very good scorer. That's a big loss. They traded away a first-round pick for him, and he was just there for a year. So that's going to be a hard one for them to swallow for their fans. They added Jonas Korpisalo. We'll see what happens with their goaltending, and Dominique Kubalik, also Cam Talbot and Patrick Brown out. For them, I think also, again, it's going to be about how some of these young players progress. And they added Jacob Chikrin last season late. Let's see what he can do in a full season with Ottawa. He was obviously struggling a little bit in Arizona, which is why they traded him, but he's got a ton of potential. Jake Sanderson, really good young defenseman. Obviously, Thomas Chabot's very good. Up front, they've got a burgeoning superstar in Tim Stützle, who's quickly, emerging as the best player from his draft year. The Rangers and the Kings probably maybe wish they would have taken him over Lafreniere and Quentin Byfield. So Stützle just looks like an absolute stud. Brady Tkachuk is extremely good. Giroux still has a lot left. They added Vladimir Tarasenko, obviously should have included him on the ad list. Who we'll see what he's got left on that 1-year deal. They could kind of go either way. I lean towards thinking that they may struggle to make the playoffs. But they certainly have a shot depending on what kind of steps some of these young kids take.
Yeah, I can't disagree with that either. And but again, they're almost like the Sabres in a way, though. Again, goaltending is going to be a question mark. I know Korpisalo's got a number of years in, but he's his limited experience as a starter over a full season. So it's going to be interesting to see how that works out. Their defense, that's still a bit of an issue, though. When you got someone like Jake Sanderson in there, who I believe was had just a solid rookie campaign. He's only going to get better. So hopefully that improves things for them as well. Tarasenko will be interesting to see how well he does, but I think he's going to be motivated because it's a 1-year contract. It's, he's betting on himself because he's going to be looking at trying to get a more lucrative deal next year, probably somewhere else. He plays well in Ottawa. It's going to benefit the Senators, and it's going to benefit him. So it'll be interesting to see how that season shakes out.
Detroit Red Wings are the penultimate team in this division. They finished well out of the playoffs, and they're a team that has kind of been in a rebuild here for a little bit, a good period of time. They really need to kind of take the next step. They had a lot of additions last offseason. It didn't necessarily work out for them. Again, this offseason, a ton of additions. We just talked about Alex DeBrincat left Ottawa, and now he's with Detroit. So Detroit added DeBrincat. They added Shane Gostisbehere, Daniel Sprong, JT Compher. Those 4 guys, DeBrincat is obviously a stud. Sprong, Gostisbehere, Compher, they're going to add some scoring. Justin Hall, James Reimer in net, Klim Kostin, Christian Fischer out, Dominic Kubalik, Robert Haig, Pius Suter, Jordan Esterly, and Philip Zadina, who was a top draft pick there who never really worked out. They finally cut ties with him. So we'll see what happens there. So there's a lot going on with the Red Wings. They also have a number of very good young prospects who, we'll see what happens with those guys. But it's, now they've got Larkin, they've got DeBrincat, they've got the good defense core. One of the, Mort Seider obviously is one of the top young defensemen in the league. Ben Sherratt, they've got one guy who could be a key for them. We'll see what happens is Simon Edvinsson, who's a 6'6" defenseman that they drafted a few years ago. Very talented offensively, but it may take him a little bit of time to unlock that potential. He got a cup of tea in the NHL last year. I think he had 2 goals. I don't know if he'll start the season with Detroit or in the AHL. He had some surgery, I believe, towards the end of last season. Their goaltending situation, like I mentioned, Ville Husso was decent for them, and they signed James Reimer, so they've got a couple of decent goalies. I'm just not sure they're quite ready to take the next step. So they added a couple good players in the draft. Nate Danielson was a decent pick. And Axel Sandin Pellikka, I think, was a better pick. But yeah, I don't know if they're a playoff team. They should be improved. Will it be enough to satisfy their fans? I guess we'll see.
Yeah, because last year, like I was among the folks that was expecting them to make the big leap and be a playoff contender, and it obviously didn't pan out. So, tinkering again done by Steve Yzerman, their general manager. I do like the addition of DeBrincat. They needed to bring in more score. A lack of scoring is what did them in last year. So bringing in DeBrincat, if he meshes well with Dylan Larkin, and of course Lucas Raymond, he took a step back last season in sophomore year. Moritz Seider, he was another one who took a bit of a step back. But if these guys get over their sophomore slumps, and they should, if they progress as we expect, then they got a good shot. But there's several teams in that Atlantic Division that have lots of promise, but which one's gonna come through on it?
Did they make enough moves to be a playoff? Like you thought it was last year, but they do enough to be a playoff contender this year now.
The addition of DeBrincat, I think, makes all the difference. Last year, like they brought in guys like David Perron and Ben Sherratt, like brought in veterans, but they brought in a lot of guys. These were guys mostly, though, the key guys they were looking at were guys in their early 30s that they brought in. And with DeBrincat, it's a guy who fits right in with that, that youth movement they've got going there. He's 25, he's still got a ton of upside. He's got 2 40-goal seasons under his belt. So that bringing him in could make all the difference right there. But, we'll see, because again, you got Ottawa and Buffalo right in there too. So they're going to have to work hard if they're going to get over those 2 kids and those 2 teams and qualify for a playoff berth.
Last team in the division, the Montreal Canadiens, who were one of the worst teams in the league last year and will probably be one of the worst teams in the league again this year. But I think there is some room for upwards potential. I see Lyle's giving me the sideways look there. They have some very talented players. Like Nick Suzuki is very talented. Brendan Gallagher. Cole Caulfield's going to be back from the shoulder surgery that he had. Josh Anderson's obviously a good player. Their defense is okay. It's not great. And I think their goaltending is a question mark. You know, Jake Allen can have good years. He can have bad years. So they didn't really make a whole lot of moves this offseason. I think that in Alex Newhook, who they'll try and rehabilitate like they did. By the way, Kirby Dach, who they added, is also a guy that I think could have a pretty good season this year. Newhook is in. They'll try and see what they can do with him. Jonathan Drouin, who just never really worked out anywhere to this point, is out. Joel Edmondson is out. So they didn't really make a whole lot of moves. I think that, again, a lot of it's going to be how the young kids come along. Suzuki, Doc, Caulfield. They've got solid veterans. I do think that they'll be better than the bottom feeder teams that you know, maybe we look at teams like the Sharks and maybe the Coyotes. I think that the Coyotes actually made some improvements. But I clearly they're not going to be as bad as the Sharks. We'll see where the Flyers land, but I think it's pretty clear the Canadians are not going to be a playoff team this season.
Oh yeah, no, I'm not disagreeing with that assessment at all, Dan. The only issue for me though with the Canadians was, you know, last season and the season before, they were just walloped by injuries. I mean, they set a record last season for the most man games lost to injury. And there were 10 games that I saw, at least about 10 to 12 games. Don't ask me to name every one of them, but there were 10 to 12 games where if they'd had a healthy roster, they could have won those games. Now, it wouldn't have put them into the playoffs. They still would have missed the playoffs, but they wouldn't have missed by a whole lot. You know, it would have been by less than 10 points rather than by, nearly 30. So, they turned around and they made significant offseason changes to some of their medical staff, to their trainers, obviously. They're not bringing in a lot of veteran talent, obviously, because they're sticking with the rebuild and they're sticking with their kids bringing in. So they should improve. How much they'll improve, I mean, yeah, it's going to depend on how well those young players perform and if they can stay healthy. They're not going to be a playoff team. There's still a lot of work to be done there. But the one thing I will say about the most excitement was when they took David Reinbacher at 5th overall, and people in Montreal, excuse my language, lost their goddamn minds. Not all of them, but a lot of them, because they really wanted Michkov. And no offense to Michkov or anything like that, but the Canadians knew what they were doing when they drafted Reinbacher, because if you look at what they're doing here, they're building up that blue line core. And, with guys, and I don't want to get too deep in this, go off the rails and turn this into a Canadians podcast. It's just, they've got some very promising young defensemen there that could form a solid core for them if they pan out for the next 10 years. And Reinbacher is going to be a key part of it. I mean, this kid's, is already, he's 18 years old. He just graduated high school and he just finished his second season in the Swiss National League, so this kid is really good. So I was surprised that Montreal took Reinbacher, but I wasn't upset by it, unlike a lot of other people who wanted the shiny thing in Michkov. But hey, that's for the Flyers, and you guys deserve a Kit Kat after everything you all went through this past year. So there you go.
Yeah, I mean, between Reinbacher and Lane Hudson, you guys look pretty settled.
Oh boy, Lane Hudson.
He just looks incredible. What is real quick before we move on to whatever the next division is? What is, aside from not being able to pronounce David Reinbacher's name, what is Carey Price's status these days?
Carey Price's career is done. His playing career is over.
Officially over. Okay.
Yeah, he's still involved with the team, in a general capacity. Right now it's almost more just like, press the flesh and, sort of in a promotional sort of way. I'm not sure if he's going to be involved in a front office role at some point or in a coaching role, but he's still part of the team, but his playing career is done. You will never see him lace up the pads and go out and play an NHL game again. It's over.
Just one thing about Reinbacher. I mean, you're talking to, I think all three of us were really more on board with taking David Jiricek the year before. We got Cutter Gauthier, and I think we all really like Cutter Gauthier. Mm-hmm. But we understand the mentality of seeing a kid who could be a horse on the blue line. Certainly understand that mindset. That's for sure.
Mm. And Montreal fans forgot. They're like, oh, but we haven't had a scoring star since Guy Lafleur and Stefan Richen. Cole Caulfield says hi. Cole Caulfield would have hit 40 goals last season if he hadn't been derailed by a shoulder injury. Would have been the first Canadian to do that in 30 years, something like that. So, yeah. Anyway, let's not turn this into a Habs podcast. Moving on.
No, it's okay. It's okay. It opened up the door for us to get Michkov, so we're not complaining. Okay, so nothing screams Central Division more to me than the Arizona Coyotes. Well, not really. So when you're the weak sis, they're going to put you anywhere they can. They really packed that 5,000 seat stadium. But in all seriousness, the Coyotes parted ways with Christian Fischer, but they brought in Sean Dursey, Jason Zucker, or I should say Zucker as in looker, as Scott Laughlin always likes to say, Alex Kerfoot, Nick Bukestad, and Troy Stetcher. And kind of, it's not a real great upgrade there. They got a lot of young talent, had a great year from Clayton Keller. They signed Logan Cooley to his entry level. That's a heck of a player. He probably would have been drafted very high in this past draft. So, I mean, things are looking up. The problem is management, ownership. Where the heck are they going to be in a year or two?
Yeah, exactly. I mean, and a lot of people didn't notice because everybody was pointing and laughing at their arena situation. They improved last year quite a bit. Clayton Keller tied the franchise record for points, which a record held by Keith Tkachuk, 86 points. Mm-hmm. So that's not nothing. And Matthias Michelli had a fantastic debut season. They inked him to a new contract, a fine setup man there. You mentioned Cooley, of course, coming in. And some of the additions that they made. And their general manager, Bill Armstrong, recently said they moved from, the whole kind of rebuild thing towards, now they're moving toward, improving. It's not enough that we're selling off contracts and we're going to be the third party banker for teams looking to shed cap space. They actually are looking at moving ahead now, which they should, because my God, they're still loaded with draft picks for the next 3 years. And could be again at this year's trade deadline. But yeah, I think this is the season we're going to see them make even more improvement. We don't know, again, hanging over their heads is still the whole uncertainty about their arena situation. But this is a team that I think we're going to see improve. It's a promising young team. If they do a good job maintaining it, it could develop into something special, in 2 or 3 years' time.
Yeah. That's for sure. Now we move to the team that did the consummate tear down to the studs rebuild. So the Chicago Blackhawks said goodbye to Jonathan Toews. Has there been a determination whether he's going to play at all? Do you think maybe he's got another year in him? And is he getting picky about that, or he still could retire?
He has kept silent, but there was a report that came out back about a month ago that when his agency released their list of unrestricted free agents to the teams, that Toews' name was not on it. Now, you can make of that what you will, but if that's the case, honestly, I think he's retiring. I mean, he's had health issues for the last, 3 years. He's been dogged by with long COVID and chronic immune syndrome. So I think he's done. That's it. It's after 15 seasons, most of them, Hall of Fame worthy. Yeah, I think it's over for Jonathan Toews.
Okay. Sorry to hear that, but a fantastic career and tremendous level of achievement. But they did add this Bedard kid. And he's kind of taking the focus away from the old and now to the new. And listen, Bedard should be a generational talent. He's going to probably be at least a star, if not a superstar. And around him, they bring in Taylor Hall, who's been through that first overall draft pick scene before. So there's a good exposure to a guy who knows how to talk about the expectations of what Connor Bedard is going to be going through. Ryan Donato, Corey Perry. Yeah, and we see a pattern here. Leadership, toughness, and of course, Nick Foligno. So while they're not going to make this gigantic leap in the standings, they're supporting the franchise, and the franchise right now is Connor Bedard.
Absolutely. And there's nowhere to go but up. When you look at what, the tank last year, which is what it was, but every team does it at one point or another. Hello, Montreal, 2 years ago. Yeah. Everybody does it. But regardless, yeah, I like those additions they made. It was definitely to help this kid, carry the load, show them the leadership, and show the other young players that they've got on that roster as well. The other guys that are going to be in there that they're looking towards, guys like Kevin Korchinski, who was one of their top draft picks. You got guys that came in beforehand, like, Taylor Radish, that, they're going to look at for him to help make the next step. And these are guys that are going to benefit as well, not just Bedard, but from having guys like Perry and Taylor Hall and Nick Foligno in there. So, obviously we can all agree, not a playoff contender, but it's going to be fun to see how they progress over the course of the season with Connor Bedard in the lineup.
Oh, sure. I mean, it's going to remind a lot of people in my age bracket of days when Lindros showed up in like circa 92. So those are fun days. So I'd imagine that coming off the success that they've had in the past and now going through that slump, we're back building up again. So we're going to move on from the outhouse to the penthouse in Colorado, with the Avalanche finished first overall, but they have a lot of tricky maneuvering to do right now. They have a lot of players that are injured, key guys, and they parted ways with Evan Rodriguez, JT Compher. They made a trade. Alex Newhook, they let go of him, so they kind of gave up on him, but they had their reasons. Eric Johnson, Lars Eller, Matt Nieto. So they brought in Ryan Johansson, a bit of a gamble there. Ross Colton, solid ad. Jonathan Drouin, a teammate of Nathan McKinnon, trying to rekindle the talent that Jonathan Drouin definitely hasn't really shown consistently, and with injuries and other issues. And of course, Miles Wood, who skates 100 miles an hour and is a tough guy, not a big play driver, but an exciting player that might fit in with their particular system, which is skill and speed.
Yeah, absolutely. And, let's be honest. I mean, they're going to miss Gabe Landeskog again, but they were able to play without him and adjusted, for the most part.
It's all year.
Oh yeah, it's another season he's out. Yeah, with that knee. So but I like the additions there that they made. I mean, and Drouin's just for $750K. I mean, why not? Grab him, throw him in there, see what's the worst that can happen. Doesn't pan out, then it didn't cost you nothing. Right. But they've got you've got Nathan McKinnon and you've got Ranton in there as well. Two of the best forwards in the game. So they're going to be fine in terms of scoring. I think that, Georgiev, I think, did a solid job in his first full season as a starter for them. And that blue line, if that can stay healthy, that's going to be key. Okay. They need a healthy season from especially from Bo Byram. Because he's missed a lot of time. But you got Cale Makar and Devon Toews, one of the best, top pairings in the league. So they're going to be fine. They're still going to be, a solid playoff contender and I think a top 4 team there in the Western Conference.
Yeah, no doubt. So we move to the Dallas Stars. This is a team that at least on paper seemed to have made really some solid additions. Bringing in Matt Duchene, Craig Smith, and parting with Colin Miller, Max Domi, Frederick Olofsson, and Luke Glendening. And this is a Dallas Star squad that, except for a couple bounces, could have been the finals as easily as the Vegas, Golden Knights were. And you could argue that their goaltender had found his form, it might have had a different result. So, and I want to make mention that I think Jim Nill is one of the best general managers in the league at retooling on the fly. He has this knack of hanging on to certain veterans, knowing which guys to hang on to while bringing in some kids, just kind of doing it all. That is, it's very difficult. And he might have been the secret to success in Detroit for all those years. And I think that's bearing out. What do you say?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, as you said, you said the phrase rebuilding on the fly, and he's been a master of it because you look at it, they are slowly but surely transitioning away from older guys like Jamie Benn and Tyler Seguin, and I would even say their defenseman, Esa Lindell. Yeah, needed a minute. But, they're slowly transitioning away from those guys who were core guys for them for years. And it's, Miro Heiskanen. It's Robertson and Rupe Hintz and their goaltender there, Jake Ottinger. Those are the new core guys that are going to be taking on larger and larger roles going forward. And I like the addition of Matt Duchene because it was kind of a lack of scoring punch there against the Golden Knights. I think that really did them in. Jason Robertson really struggled badly in that series. So you bring in a guy like Matt Duchene, that's going to help them out a lot. They're another team that I think they're a cup contender coming out of the Western Conference, to be quite honest. They're, with those younger players who are only going to get better, watch out. I think the Dallas Stars are really going to dominate not just the division, but they're going to dominate the conference.
Yeah, I could definitely see that. Another maybe dark horse contender would be the Minnesota Wild. I mean, it's a heck of a squad, 103 points last year. So they part ways with Gustav Nyquist, Matt Dumba. Everybody's wondering where the heck is that guy going to be playing next year? It won't be Minnesota. John Klingberg, another defenseman they parted ways with, Ryan Reeves. But they bring in Patrick Maroon to kind of offset the Ryan Reeves loss. And Maroon's got a little bit better pair of hands than Ryan Reeves ever had. So other than that, there's some internal growth there that they're counting on, I would believe.
Oh yeah, Kaprizov's only going to keep getting better. I mean, obviously he's their franchise player. He's the most exciting player that they've had since Marian Gaborik, perhaps even more exciting. Matt Boldy's going to be another one they're going to look for, for improvement. Ryan Hartman as well. And in goal, the interesting thing there is going to be between Marc-Andre Fleury and Philip Gustafsson. I mean, right now they're looking at it as a 1A, 1B situation. I can see that becoming just, Gustafsson as the full-time starter and Fleury going more into a backup role. No offense to Fleury, but I mean, he's almost 40 years old. This is his last contract. It's probably his last season. So I can see him going more into a backup role. But you talk about good management. I'll give credit where credit's due, and that's to Bill Guerin, because he handcuffed himself having to do those buyouts of Ryan Suter and Zach Parise, which had to be done. But, listen, he hasn't hurt his team. This is still a solid team that he's got built up there with talent from within as well. So, I think they're going to be a playoff club again.
They have a really good young group of prospects.
Oh my Lord. Yes, Dan. Absolutely.
Some of my favorite prospects, under the radar types of prospects. Marco Rossi obviously is a big name prospect. Jesper Wallstedt is probably, along with Dustin Wolf, probably the two best goalie prospects in the league, I would say. Mm-hmm. And then they've got, Liam Ogren, who was their first-round pick last year, is really good. They've got one of my favorite players in the Russian league, a kid named Marat Kuznetsov, who a lot of these KHL prospects, two of them are my favorites, Kuznetsov and Arseny Gritsyuk with the Devils. Are guys that most people haven't even heard of over here, but they're really good young players in the KHL. And next offseason, both Kuznetsov and Liam Ogren from the SHL are probably going to join the Wild roster, and they're going to be ready to roll because those guys are going to be seasoned, have been playing against professionals. So I think that the Wild are really lining up to, if not this year, next year and the year after, for the final 2 years of the current Kaprizov contract, I think they're going to be, really good team.
Well, and you look at, you mentioned Kaprizov. Kaprizov was a 5th round pick, 4th or 5th round, I believe. So, the Wild have done very well at plucking, you could say sort of obscure Russian players and turning them into stars. So if those two kids that you're talking about, if they come up and play as well as anticipated, they're going to have some wicked scoring punch there. But you're right, though. Their depth and prospects is just, it's among the best in the league. No question.
Yeah, I'm just wondering who on defense is going to move the needle, because that would be one area that they need to improve. So listen, if they have some of these kids, maybe they could trade for a defenseman if they're that close. There's guys like Spurgeon and who else they have on defense there?
Jonas Brodin.
Yeah, they're not getting any younger, so that could be an area of concern. But yeah, so the Nashville Predators. Now, here's a team that is definitely rebuilding. Those are two buyouts of Duchene and Johansson.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So, they bring in Ryan O'Reilly. That's an interesting one. Gustav Nyquist and Luke Schenn. And O'Reilly and Luke Schenn have won cups. So I kind of they want to keep the culture, but they're clearly kind of reshuffling the deck. Is this more of a retool or a rebuild with Barry Trotz now taking over?
That's a retool. They're not rebuilding. That's a retool that's going on there. When you bring in somebody like Ryan O'Reilly at this stage in his career, you're not rebuilding. It was interesting moves made by Barry Trotz, and let's not forget too. I mean, they do have some promising young kids in there. I mean, Luke Evangelista was a very pleasant surprise for them down the stretch, because when they started moving players out at the trade deadline, that opened the door for some of these kids, and lo and behold, down the stretch, it looked like the Preds were actually going to sneak in when everybody had written them off. So I think Barry Trotz looked at that and thought, let's see if we can just tweak the recipe a little bit here and see what we can come up with. So they're going to be interesting to watch. They've got an outstanding goaltender in Saros. They still have one of the top defensemen in the NHL in Roman Josi. So they're going to be in good shape. Philip Forsberg he'll be back. He'll be hopefully stay healthy for the whole season, and, could be 40 goals again. So I wouldn't sleep on them. I can definitely see them contending for a playoff berth.
Yeah, real quick, Lyle mentioned two of my favorite kids from the end of last season. Luke Evangelista was one of them. He was a really under the radar prospect. I think he was a second or third round pick, and he was doing really well in the AHL with the Admirals. And then they called him up, and they had some openings, and he really looked good to me. And then Philip Tomasino, who I think was a player who was probably expecting to make their team out of camp, because the previous year he played with the Predators, but they decided to send him down to the AHL for more seasoning, kind of what the Flyers did with Cam York. Tomasino spent more time in the AHL than York did, but when they brought him back up at the end of the season, he was really good, and he's got a lot of scoring upside. I think him and Evangelista are probably going to be two guys to keep an eye on this season to see if they can keep that momentum going, or if they kind of regress a little bit. But they're two really good young players who are going to form a real part of that team's future. I really like their first round pick this year too. Matthew Wood is a kid who played in college last year as opposed to playing in the U.S. National Development Program. Was really good at UConn. He's got some foot speed issues, but he's got a lot of offensive upside, sort of like a Kevin Stevens, John LeClaire type of player, potentially 6'4", power forward. So I thought that was a good draft pick who has got a higher ceiling than some of the guys who are taken around him.
Mm-hmm. So we move on to the St. Louis Blues. Boy, what to say about this team? They're very old on defense, and they add Kevin Hayes. We all know about that. They got him for a cut rate, and they let go Logan Brown. So that's a bit of an upgrade. But a lot of this feels like, well, we got Kyrou, we have Thomas, and we're kind of old on defense. We have some other kids we like, but where are they at right now?
Yeah, this is kind of like a retool as well. But that the blue line core. Well, I mean, like Parayko is not that old. He's 30, and Torrey Krug's 30. Well, he's 32. But yeah, I mean, when you got Kyrou, you got Thomas in there. Buchnevich as well also played well for them. They're really hard to pin down, and a lot of that's going to depend too on goaltending as well. Jordan Binnington, when he's on his game, he can be outstanding, and when he's off his game, he is god awful. So, a lot's going to depend on what kind of a season he has. The defense may be aging, but I mean, I think they can still get the job done. There's still a lot of question marks throughout this team as to what they're going to be.
To me, they're one of the most thoroughly uninteresting teams in the league because of what we just talked about. They've got all these players on these contracts who are probably close to not movable, especially on defense.
Yeah.
With Falk and Krug and Parayko and Nick Leddy. Up front, Kyrou and Robert Thomas are mid-20s players who definitely still have some offensive upside left. But then you start getting into some of their other forwards, and they're paying a lot of guys between $3.5 to $6 million who – I don't know how much they're really going to add. Lyle talked about Jordan Binnington, who who would be surprised if he's not even in the NHL at this time next season? I mean, he's got this contract, $6 million for the next 4 years, but he's just so crazy that you never know what he's going to do. I do think that they've got a really good young goalie in Joel Hofer, who probably after Dustin Wolf was probably the second best goalie in the AHL last season. They brought him up towards the end of the year. He was really good. So I think that he's kind of under the radar, one of the better young goalie prospects in the league. But overall, their team to me is not that interesting.
Big change from 4 years ago.
Yeah. Well, they weren't even that interesting that year, and they won the Stanley Cup, right? So, maybe who knows?
They had Tarasenko and Peter Angelo.
No, I know. Their defense was 4 years younger.
Gloria, yes.
The Gloria stuff was fun, but
yeah.
They heard that song when they were playing on the road in
South Philly, right?
They were at a bar in Philly after the game, and they heard that song play, and they just decided that was going to be their song.
And wasn't that around the time they was at midseason and
it was a game in January. I think it was a January game.
Yeah, and that kind of was where it all turned around.
Gloria turned it all around for them.
I remember it was right in it was December or January, and I remember Jeremy Rutherford finally waved the white flag. He said, "I'm not defending this team anymore. I'm done. It's time to break it up." And just then they pulled it out. They pulled the rug out from underneath.
Vegas was struggling this past year, and it wasn't one of their columnists, but I'm a big poker guy. I don't know if you guys know who Daniel Negreanu is. He's one of the most famous poker players. And
Canadian,
he's a huge Golden Knights fan, and he tweeted out, "I'm done. I've had it with the Golden Knights. Take all your money and bet on them to miss the playoffs. They just don't have it this year." And literally from that point on, that team went on an absolute tear.
Yeah.
So it's kind of like a similar thing.
Just goes to show you. So we go out to Winnipeg, and I know Chef is very impressed with the haul that the Jets got for Pierre-Luc Dubois, and they also parted ways with Blake Wheeler. So they get Gabriel Velarde, Ix Alafalo, Laurent Brossois, and Rasmus Kupari, who they just signed to a 2-year deal. And so obviously the big trade there is with LA. The same old story is nobody seems to want to stay in Winnipeg, and that has been a running theme. And now we have to worry about Hellebuck. What's going to happen with him? What's going to happen with Scheifele? What's the talk out in Winnipeg?
Well, first of all, Winnipeg kind of gets a bad knock here because look, it's not true that nobody wants to stay in Winnipeg. Connor Hellebuck signed a long-term deal and needs to stay there. Mark Scheifele signed a long-term deal. Blake Wheeler signed a long-term. Players want to stay, but they want to stay if there's a good winning atmosphere there. It's no coincidence that Hellebuck, Scheifele, and Wheeler all signed their contracts back around the time, if you look at about 5-6 years ago, when they were a really good team. They haven't been a really good team in a really long time. They only made the playoffs last year because Hellebuck just down the stretch was just outstanding. You've got these issues, though, with Hellebuck and Scheifele. Are they going to stay? Are they going to go? Apparently, Hellebuck said he's not interested in a contract extension, but they didn't trade him. The goalie market's dried up, so everybody's expecting him and Scheifele to be in the lineup to start the season. Where it goes from there, who can say? If the Jets are winning, they won't trade them because to them, the playoff money is more important than rebuilding the team, even though an overwhelming majority of Jets fans in poll after poll are saying, rebuild now. And they have some good young players they can build around. Especially with Kyle Connor. You've got, Pionk's not young. He's 28, but still, decent defenseman. Same with Josh Morrissey, decent defenseman. You brought in, you bring in guys like Velarde and Iafallo. They'll help you out as well. But right now, I haven't seen anything that says that this team has significantly improved. They can be a marginal playoff contender if they hang on to Hellebuck and he plays well. And if he struggles, then no, it's just going to be more of the same. Just a dog's dinner. You don't know what you're going to get. So,
yeah, but in that 90 to 95 point range.
But yeah, about there. Whatever that cutoff is for making the playoffs, that's where they'll be on one side or the other.
Yeah, just a little bit better than the mushy middle.
Yeah.
So yeah, that's Winnipeg. I wish them well. So Chef, you have the two New York teams, and you have Pittsburgh and the Caps. So why don't you take over there?
All right, let's start with Pittsburgh. All right, I'm going to go now. Dubas made a lot of moves, but the biggest move that was made was Hextall was out of there, and I think, but through their whole thing, they added some scoring punch. They made a lot of moves. Who's out? In is Riley Smith, Ryan Graves, Noel Akari, Lars Eller, and Matt Nieto. Is that right?
Nieto.
Yeah.
Okay, I wasn't sure. And then, Al Zucker, Kulikov, Damelin, Bonino, Poling, we know where he went, and then Josh Archibald. So a lot of stuff going on here, a lot of moves. I think they got a little bit better. And I guess Flyers fans, they hate that, but in this season, they won't care. It's like Dan says, you're trying to get the top 3 pick again this year. So that's all good and said. I think they did all right. Dubas, he seems to get a lot of bang for his buck. He doesn't make the big flashy moves, but he gets a lot out of the players he acquires. So he guess he sees something there. I think they could jump up a little bit. I think they're right at that like you guys just said, that 80-90 playoff mark. That might be, but I think it might be higher in the Met this year. You could have other teams pushing for that. So.
Yeah, and I do think that they've improved, and you're right about Kyle Dubas. Say what you will about his previous work in Toronto, but this guy knows salary cap gymnastics better than most, and he is able to kind of find players to plug in there. I did like some of the guys that he brought in there. I think Ryan Graves is a good addition to the blue line. That's going to bring some more, some physicality there. The fact that he's from my hometown of Yarmouth, Nova Scotia, has nothing to do with that assessment whatsoever. Totally unbiased. But honestly, I think it'd be a good addition. It was surprising though that they re-signed Tristan Jarry and gave him a long-term deal. So who knows? Maybe that shot of confidence is what he needs to kind of help him regain his mojo. But on the basis of how things stand right now, yes, I think the Penguins have improved. Remember, they were a playoff team until about the last week of this season, and then they just crapped the bed against the Islanders, and then that was it. Lost to teams they had no business losing to. I think that's different this time around. I think they're improved that way. Based on the moves they've made now, if they get Erik Karlsson, depending on who they give up in the process, that will significantly improve them for this season anyway. Based on the guys they have for this season, that will be a significant improvement.
That cup window's got to be closing for Crosby, Malkin.
Yeah, it closed a long time ago. I'm not even sure if you bring Karlsson in that it's going to open it up again, but that's the way the Penguins ownership is going right now. It's win now with these guys, one more run with that aging core. So that's the whole reason behind going after Erik Karlsson.
Got it.
Okay. Islanders, they got nobody new. Who they cut? Parisi and Bailey, right? I guess it's, they're taking the Flyers philosophy because I think what Torts had said, same thing, addition by subtraction. I don't know how to judge this team anymore. I don't know what to say here. So I'll see if any of you guys can help me out here because I don't know what they were thinking. They did basically nothing.
Yeah, Lou Lamoriello is basically going to run that roster again. He believes in them, even though it's been 3 years since they 2 years, 3 years since they made their big run. 2 years. Yeah, whatever. Right, yeah. The bottom line is this team barely got into the playoffs and didn't make it the year before because they lack scoring punch. It's as simple as that. I mean, no offense to Brock Nelson and Matthew Barzal, obviously, contributed, did very well. They're their best scorers, Anders Lee, but they still need more. And that's why Lamoriello tried to get Johnny Gaudreau and I just drew a blank here. The other guy that they chased, the center who played for Nazem Kadri. I knew it would come to me.
Okay,
that's why he chased Kadri and Gaudreau last summer, and why he was rumored to be on a couple of other forwards this year. There was talk that he might go after Tarasenko. There was talk he was going to look into trying to get DeBrincat. So you can see what's going on here. I mean, that's why he went out and acquired Bo Horvat, which helps. But they still need another scoring winger on there. And they've got an outstanding goaltender in Sorokin. They still have a solid defense. It's not spectacular, but it's solid. They'll work hard. They'll get the job done for you. But if they don't improve that scoring punch, it's still touch and go for them to make the playoffs.
Another one of the most uninteresting teams in the league as well.
Yeah. The Blues, Canucks, Islanders, man.
Well, I disagree with you about the Canucks, but we'll
yeah, I
okay.
do as well. But yeah,
Blues and the
Well,
Islanders.
Blues and Isles, yeah, I go along
All
with that. Yeah.
So now for the Rangers. Now this is interesting. I do believe Isaiah and I thought they were going to be a lot better last year. I think you had them going to the Cup, right?
Yeah,
Or winning the Cup. You had them winning the Cup. Yeah.
Yes,
Yeah, here's the thing.
I said they were a playoff or a cup contender as well. Yeah.
Here's the thing, it should have been good. They had Tarasenko and Kane. They got them at the trade deadline, and I just think that this is the perfect example of just because you have great players doesn't mean you just can't throw a whole bunch. You have to have a team. It can't just be all. Let's just going to throw all these great players together. There's got to be chemistry there, and I think that's a perfect example. I mean, they got in is Gustafsson, Wheeler, Quick, Bonino. Out is Tarasenko, Kane, Halak, and what's that, Mikola? So, I mean, yeah, there's some big names going out. So, and there's some decent names coming in, but nothing that, that this, I think they're trying to get it right this time, maybe by bringing in players that will be more like a team, not just chasing a cup.
And don't forget the coaching change that happened as well. And I think that's a big reason behind the problem too. I mean, and listen, where I'm here from now, I live in Prince Edward Island. Gerard Galland is an island boy. He's known affectionately around here by his nickname of Turk. He's a very good NHL coach, but he has his favorites and he sticks with them, and he will ride those horses until they drop. And, that was seen as part of the problem for the Rangers last year, especially for the younger guys like Lafreniere, for Kakko, for Hedel. That line that, of youngsters who played so well for them in the 2022 playoffs. No, they didn't take the big step that everybody was expecting for them to take this season. So they bring in Peter Laviolette. And it'll be interesting to see there. Maybe he's that key, because the goaltending, again, you talk about New York teams have just outstanding goaltending. Shesterkin's just, again, he it's between him and Sorokin. Honest to God, It's the battle of the New York goaltenders for the next 5 years with those two. I'm telling you. They've got a good defense there. Jacob Trouba's overpaid, but listen, he's a leader. He's physical, borderline dirty, but hey, there are players who do. They're the type of guys you like to have on your team, and you hate to play against them. Up front, though, but more than just getting more out of those young guys, they need to get guys like Panarin really going consistently, especially in the playoffs. Got to get them going in the playoffs, because if not, then it's just not going to happen. So they have the talent to do it. Let's see how Laviolette works it, and see if they can regain that momentum that they had coming into last season.
Yeah. I guess the last one on my list that I have is the Capitals. Coming in, Paxaretti, outgoing Edmondson, and then outgoing Connor Brown. They got rid of their Connors. They're down 2 Connors. How much does it make an impact, though? I expect them to always be competitive because of who's left on their team. Ovi's getting up there, but the son of a gun, he just sits there and you can't stop it. So you're going to get. At least this is one of those teams it's not vanilla to me. It's like, oh, you know what? I'll still watch the Capitals game because you never know. And Oshie's chasing Gretzky, so there'll be a lot of buzz around this team this year. But I don't know if they're playoff, especially in the Met.
Yeah,
right?
Well, yeah. If you gave me a choice between whether it's going to be the Capitals or the Penguins that are going to make the playoffs, I'm going with the Penguins. The Capitals, there's so many question marks there. Is Nick Backstrom going to be back to form after having the hip surgery and the recovery from all of that? What about TJ Oshie? He's getting up there. How much longer can he keep playing that style of game that he does? Darcy Kemper, he had some games where he was not really all that good. Tom Wilson, he'll be back in the lineup. Obviously, he'll provide more physicality over the course of a year. But as I said, but you've got like Kuznetsov is coming off a bad year for him. They were actually trying to trade him, and still could if they could find a taker. Anthony Mantha, a big disappointment for them last season. Another one they were trying to trade, couldn't find any takers. If those two guys don't bounce back, it's going to be a very, very rough season. The only thing Capitals fans will really have to look forward to will be Ovechkin's chase of Gretzky. So, it's going to be interesting to see. But right now, I don't like their chances to make the playoffs. I really don't.
Yeah, I don't think they're a playoff team. But as you mentioned, the most important thing for them is the number 72, that's the number of goals that Ovechkin is currently behind Wayne Gretzky. So I live in DC. That's the thing that people here talking about is that, and they'll have another year where I doubt they make the playoffs. And they added Ryan Leonard in the draft this year, and they'll keep. They brought over Ivan Miroshchenko, who is one of the better young players in Russia. So they've got some young talent on the way, and they'll add some more probably in the lottery next season. But yeah, it'll be all about Ovechkin for that team.
Yeah, most certainly. So I have the Carolina Hurricanes coming off a 113-point season. This is a team that is vexing in that they have some stars, but they don't have that superstars, and they haven't made that move, whether it's in goal to get a star goalie or to get a guy who's going to, get 40 goals or is, at a certain level above Sebastian Aho, who signs this big $9 million contract, and he's worthy of it. And he's a heck of a player. But anyway, they move on from Max Pacioretty, Shane Gostisbehere, Calvin DeHaan. They bring in Dmitry Orlov, Michael Bunting, who should fit right in with them. And of course, they added Tony DeAngelo in what turned out to be a better situation for, I believe, both clubs. Obviously for Carolina, but for the Flyers, the buyout worked out better. It's really a better way for them to go, to not hold as much this year and move on from the player that clearly they had no plans to work with. So what do you think about this team? Are they ever going to break through and get to that Stanley Cup final where then, anything could happen?
Yeah. Listen, they play one of the best systems in the league under one of the best coaches in Rod Brindamore, no question. I think they were definitely hampered in the playoffs last year without, Svechnikov, their top sniper, being gone. I mean, might have made a difference. But you're right, though. This is a team that, they've great regular seasons, but they've been kind of underwhelming when they get to the playoffs. And I really thought this year was going to be their year. But they were handled, they were manhandled, which is why, by the Panthers, which is why you see them bring in a feisty guy like Bunting, because they were kind of lacking that jam there as well. But, the talent's there. The talent is definitely there. We can, raise questions about, the goaltending, but they're still, say what you will, but Freddie Anderson, when he's healthy, I mean, he still plays very solid, very reliable goal. So, they've got an outstanding blue line. Adding Orlov, my God, I mean, just some. And listen, if they pair DeAngelo back up with Slavin again, I mean, listen, those two played very well together in DeAngelo's first go around there. So, and DeAngelo actually had his best all around performance. Because listen, we all know he's a one-dimensional defenseman, but like he had a significantly improved his plus minus. He was much more responsible defensively in his own zone. So that could work out well. Hey, they wouldn't have brought him back if they didn't think it was worth having. Yeah, but you're right though. Do they have that one guy who can be like a Matthew Tkachuk and carry them over the top? I don't know. They're going to be outstanding. I think wouldn't surprise me if they win the conference, maybe even be the best team in the league in the regular season, but still question marks about the playoffs, I think.
Svechnikov healthy this year?
Yep. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. He'll be good to go. Yep.
I think he can be the guy. I mean, he's a really good scorer. Between him and Aho, I think you kind of get that elite level of offense. They've got one of the best players on an ELC still, Seth Jarvis. I think is a really good young player that they've got. And I don't mind their goaltending. I think Peter Kochetkov could be a starting goalie for them right now. I think he's a really good young goalie, and Freddie Anderson's been fine. So, yeah, I think I agree with Lyle that they're one of the likely teams to lead the conference in points. They've got a couple really good young defense prospects. They've got the best defenseman over the best defenseman period in the KHL is a kid named Alexander Nikishin, who's only 22 years old. I think he led all defensemen in the KHL in scoring. He's not going to be over for a couple years. They've also got a really good young defenseman named Scott Morrow. So they've got two really good defensemen that'll be, in the lineup in a couple years from now. And they just are always good at restocking the system. And, and now they just have to translate their regular season success to postseason success. But Svechnikov healthy, I think, will help, hopefully.
Yeah, and once a team like that pushes through, all of a sudden then you start seeing them like 3 out of 5 years making the finals or something like that, and it might be a situation where they have to make a trade to get that player.
It could very well be. But you even look at that series though that they had with the Panthers. So every game was close.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, it wasn't like they were blown out. I mean, it was close, but just just.
Something missing, and that something could have been Svechnikov, like Dan was saying. Yeah. I don't doubt that even a little bit. So another really interesting team is Columbus Blue Jackets. Now, they drafted Fantilli, and apparently he's going to be playing with them this year. Mm-hmm. So that's a big addition. Some scouts and pundits feel that he'd be better going back for another year NCAA, but look, he signed his contract. He's going to be there. So they bring in Damon Severson and Ivan Provorov in a big trade with the Flyers. So they've really bulked up on defense, and they've had Zach Werenski. They lost as many man games to injury as any team last year, if not the most. So on paper, they weren't a bad team last year. They should be better this year. And you add Fantilli and the defenseman. What's the prospects for this team with Johnny Hockey and crew?
Yeah, I mean, well, there was a lot of anticipation when we went into last season, because you remember they exceeded expectations the year before. They had like an 80-plus point season, which nobody expected from them, and we're like, geez, bringing in Johnny Hockey. The injuries right off the bat didn't help. Losing, guys like Werenski, they were significant blows. They still have that issue at center, which is why Fantilli's in there now. Listen, if this kid plays up to the hype, he'll be a welcome addition to them. But I still don't see them as a playoff contender yet. They've got goaltending issues there as well. Between Mishliskin and Tarasov, two goalies that they had a lot of potential, but they really, really struggled. So it's going to be interesting. It's going to be very, very interesting. They were another team that made a coaching change as well. So it'll be interesting to see how they go. But I look at that roster and I just think there's still some holes there that have to be addressed. So I think they'll be better. I don't see them down near the bottom feeders again, but I don't see them being clinching a playoff berth.
No, more work for Jarmo Kekalainen to do, that's for sure. And don't forget, let's not forget our favorite young defenseman, David Jiricek, who could make a breakthrough maybe halfway through the year. That kid's going to be a stud, I think. But so we move on to a team that had a fantastic regular season last year in the Metropolitan, the New Jersey Devils, 112 points. And the stars are aligning for this team to really take that next level if they can get some good goaltending. So they bring in Tyler Toffoli and Colin Miller, and they departing will be Damon Severson, Ryan Graves, Thomas Tatar, Igor Sharangovich, Mackenzie Blackwood, and Miles Wood. And of course, there's a lot of internal growth with the youth there. They've drafted very well. They have a great system. And Jack Hughes and Nico Hischier. I mean, right out of the gate, 1-2, they play so fast. They're really exciting. They were green last year. They have more experience. What kind of leap do you expect that team to take?
Well, I mean, first of all, they're going to be very exciting to watch, especially offensively. Those top two lines, bringing in Toffoli. I mean, you look at their top six forwards. I mean, you're talking Brott, Hughes, and Toffoli, Meyer, Hischier, and Dawson Mercer, a player who's kind of overshadowed, by some of his more talented teammates, but still an excellent forward. The scoring goals, they're going to be scoring a lot of goals. Their defense core is solid. They're bringing in Luke Hughes, who I thought he had a very good debut. He came in facing playoff pressure, and he handled it. I thought he handled it quite well. But the goaltending's the key there. There was a lot of talk linking them to guys like John Gibson out of Anaheim, to Connor Hellebuck out of Winnipeg. Maybe that's still possible, perhaps at the trade deadline or at some point in the season, if Vanacek and Schmid, if they don't work out. Schmid looked good in the playoffs. If he can translate that into a full regular season, then they could be fine. But yeah, the goaltending for me is kind of the mystery right now for this club. They're going to score a lot of goals. They're going to be very exciting to watch. But it's going to be that goaltending that's going to determine, they're going to make the playoffs. That's obvious. They're going to be a top 4 team. That's obvious. How far they're going to go in the playoffs, again, that'll come down to the goaltending.
Yeah,
my dream with the Devils is I want them to trade Simone Nemeth, who's one of the best young defense prospects in the league, for Quinn Hughes, so that they can unite all three of the Hughes brothers. I just think that would be so much fun. And quite honestly, I think it's a trade that would make sense for both teams, because the Canucks really need to do a full-on rebuild. It's it's really not going to happen, but it's a trade that could make a little bit of sense. So, anyway, that's my dream.
Yeah.
Nemeth is. I don't think he's going to have the dynamism of somebody like Quinn Hughes, but he's in the range of the potential.
Well, and he's on an ELC for the next 3 years. So,
listen, guys, unfortunately, I've got to go. I've got to cut it. Got to cut it a little short here right now.
Sure.
But
thanks for joining.
Oh, listen, man. Thanks a lot for having me on, guys. It was. I really enjoyed this. Sorry, I didn't. I forgot we were going to go as far as we were going to go. So I got something else to take care of here right now. But
no sweat, Lyle.
Again, thank you, Lyle.
Love
so
doing
much.
this. Yeah. And hey, listen, if during some point in the season, or, whenever, if you want to have me on, I'd be delighted to join. So
fantastic. SpectorsHockey.net. Check them out.
Okay. Take care, guys. Thanks again.
Thanks.
Good night. Okay. So yeah, we ran a little long. It's one of those shows. So guess who we left for last? The Philadelphia Flyers. And Dan, since you were the point man, I might as well have you lead the way as we close things out. We're not going to get to a couple things that we wanted to get to tonight. There are some Flyer stories. We'll get to them next show.
I got some chicken I got to make here. But yeah, this was saving the best for last, right? The probable Stanley Cup champion, Philadelphia Flyers. So, no, we've talked about the Flyers, previous shows ad nauseum. Not a lot of changes not a lot of high-profile guys in. Sean Walker, and Cal Peterson, who they got basically as salary dumps from the LA Kings in exchange for basically taking them on, and we got a second-round pick. We traded Ivan Provorov for basically a first and a second-round pick. Moved out Kevin Hayes just to get him off the squad. Bought out Tony DeAngelo, James Van Riemsdyk, gone. Not a lot of big ads. Sean Walker, as I mentioned, Garnett Hathaway, who I think Flyers fans will like watching. Good sandpaper grit type of guy. Ryan Poehling, we'll see what he can do maybe as a fourth-line center. But for me, really, this year is going to be about further evaluation of the young players and probably seeing what older players you can sell off to get more pieces. To me, this year is rock bottom of the rebuild, and it should be, because we really do need to try and, do what we can to keep adding assets and maybe get a top 3 pick in the draft next year and add another elite forward or a potential top pairing defenseman. So, I'm sure that we will go into depth on another show, and we've talked about them. But for me, that's the bottom line with the Flyers is I'm going to be more interested to see how Matvei Michkov develops over in the KHL than seeing a lot of the stuff with the Flyers this year. I just want to see some of the young guys develop. We'll see what the kind of contract they signed Morgan Frost to. We'll see what happens with Carter Hart with this investigation. Hopefully nothing, and he's cleared and everything's fine. But for me, it's really about rock bottom of the rebuild, adding assets, and hopefully getting a top pick in the draft next year.
Yep. Should I take that as your closing statement, Dan?
You can, sure.
Okay, and you're at D Silver 88.
Yeah, you can find me at D Silver 88, and it's like I said. But my closing statement actually is going to be: I think it's fantastic that Matvei Michkov wants to try and play center this season, because I always tell people, like, don't fixate on what position a prospect is listed at. You never know what can happen, and Michkov is just so extraordinarily talented that if he could become a center, and we're looking at like a 1-2 center punch of like a Gauthier and a Michkov, or you can, do like with Crosby and Malkin, they can play together at times. I think it would be a good situation. So Michkov had a great first preseason game. He wants to play center. So I think that's all great. So that's where I'm going to leave it.
You got it. Chef?
Well, I'll say winner, winner, chicken dinner, because Dan's going to leave on a high note and make some chicken on that one. So, can't argue with that logic. It's going to be an interesting season, and we'll see where it ends. See where what happens, and it'll be very. I think it'll be fun and entertaining, because you're going to get to see a lot more of what we all wanted to see, was more of these younger guys, and see if they can get some pieces when it comes to the trade deadline, and see where they stand at the end of the year. You can, like I said, I stand by the fact that you can still see progress, individual progress on players, and still not be a great team. So,
yeah, if they start pairing off some players to trade to get a couple different draft picks, because they still need center. They still need a top pair defenseman prospect. This is the year to go get it. This is the year, like Dan said, to bottom out. And if that means you got to trade a guy like Lawton or Konechny or Carter Hart, depending what happens over the next month or so with his status, then it's the time to do it. It really is. So where can people follow you, Chef?
Oh yeah, you can follow me at Chef to Left B, Chef the number 2, the Left B.
You got it. You can follow me, Isaiah, ISAIAH 520 underscore 520. Isaiah, don't forget the underscore 520. And last thing for me, we're going to find out soon enough what's going to happen with Ivan Fedotov, but that's a quandary, because the IIHF might rule in the Flyers' favor, and the Flyers still might want to loan him to a Russian club, because I don't know if he's really ready to play in North America anyway. That should be interesting. So that will be the next big event. We're 68 days away, if my math is right, from the opening of the NHL season, and we'll see you many times before then. So until next time, everybody, take care.